Respiratory arrest. Endostrake 2, quick.
Men working against time to save a life. In this case, perhaps thousands.
I say we proceed on the basis of botulinus intoxication.
Emergency. Tonight at 8, 7 Central Time.
Good evening. I'm Garrick Utley, and welcome to NBC News Chronolog. Tonight, we are going to try something different. We're dividing the program into two parts, Chronolog 1 and Chronolog 2. Later, on Chronolog 2, we will be looking at some of the foibles and fantasies of our world. That is, if you consider Brigitte Bardot and Claudia Cardinale fantasies. But first, in Chronolog 1, we will investigate two problems which have not received very much attention. In Tennessee, we will see how many of the famous and beautiful Tennessee walking horses are being deliberately mistreated to make them perform better. Our major report tonight is going to be about lead poisoning. We will show how lead can harm both animals and human beings. We don't hear that much about the lead problem, but lead is everywhere in our lives. It's in the paint in our homes. It's in the ceramic dishware we eat and drink out of. And of course, it's in the air all of us breathe. We'll see what's being done about the lead problem and what isn't being done. We also have some very unusual film tonight, film which has not yet been seen in public. It shows the private side of one of the most famous couples in American history, Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. And we will start with that in a moment.
A great adventure film comes to television for the first time. Alfred Hitchcock's latest suspense hit, Topaz.
What is Topaz? A story of espionage in high places.
And I'm supposed to keep my mouth shut and uncover Topaz?
The action is global. Washington, Moscow, Copenhagen, Cuba, Paris, Harlem.
There is a woman in Cuba, isn't there?
She sometimes works for me. She is a widow of a hero of the revolution. She is loved and honored in this country. If it were not for her, you would disappear tonight.
A piece of bread can mean sudden death. A broken figurine can mean freedom.
I don't want you to be killed. There's something I have to tell you.
Tell me now.
Behind everything lurks the mystery of Topaz, a mystery that must be unraveled. Hitchcock is at his best in Topaz on NBC Saturday night at the movies at 9, 8 Central Time.
This is more than a political campaign. It is a call to arms. Give me your help, not to win votes alone, but to win in this crusade to restore America to its own people.
That was the FDR, the public song, the voice, the smile, the campaign song. But there was another FDR, the private man, as shown in these historic home movies never seen by the public. This is the Roosevelt home at Hyde Park. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was born here, and he was buried here. This is where he always returned to relax with his family and friends. To his contemporaries, Franklin Roosevelt was more than a president. He was an era, the leader through the Depression and World War II. To those younger, Franklin Roosevelt is a major figure in history, 4 times elected President of the United States. The public lives of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt are well documented. It's only recently, though, that their private lives have been discussed in any detail openly. We've obtained film showing the private side of the Roosevelt family in their moments of leisure and relaxation with friends. The films were made in the 1930s when Roosevelt was president, but returned frequently here to Hyde Park to relax. It was here at Hyde Park that the Roosevelt family gathered in 1934 to celebrate the 80th birthday of FDR's mother, Sarah Delano Roosevelt. Sarah was a strong-willed and domineering woman who tried to control the lives of those around her. As a result, there was friction between her and Eleanor Roosevelt and occasional arguments with FDR. But for this occasion, the family all smiled before the camera. These films were taken in 1932 when FDR was still governor of New York. He loved celebrating birthdays, and this one was for Louis Howe, a close friend and political advisor. Howe was one of the few people who could say no to FDR and have the president stop, look, and listen. Among Eleanor Roosevelt's friends were Marion Dickerman and Nancy Cook, both active in New York politics. Miss Dickerman, who now lives in New Canaan, Connecticut, brought us these home movies.
These films were made by Nancy Cook. Nancy Cook had been a friend of mine at college, and we had done practically everything together. Nan was one of these people that whatever she did perfectly, whether it was making furniture, making jewelry, landscaping, and she was intrigued and bought a moving picture camera and started taking these pictures just as you might take of your own family.
What kind of a man was Franklin Roosevelt?
He had overcome a handicap that would have been impossible for anyone else, but never did he refer to it. Never did he let it come in your thinking. He was a generous person. He was a person who loved people. And when I say people, I mean all people. He had the capacity to go with Vincent Astor on his yacht and have a thoroughly good time. He had the capacity to come back to Hyde Park and go to a picnic that had been organized by one of his tenant farmers and get just as much joy.
It has now become common knowledge that at one time in their marriage, Franklin Roosevelt had an affair with another woman. Did Eleanor Roosevelt talk about it to her close friends such as you?
Well, I can only say that early in our friendship with Eleanor, she told us about this. We considered it a strict confidence. We never mentioned it. It never was mentioned in the family. In any way, I know Eleanor was hurt, but it would be hard for me to answer that because there was no outward and visible sign and certainly no discussion within the family itself.
Do you think in the later years that Eleanor Roosevelt still loved Franklin Roosevelt, or was it more of a marriage, a working relationship, shall we say?
Well, that was an awfully funny word. I think she loved him as a man very, very much and was in sympathy with many of the things that he was eager to do in regard to a closer relationship. I don't see how anybody else could possibly answer that.
After you met the Roosevelts, especially Eleanor Roosevelt, where did you visit them and how much time did you spend with them?
Well, we visited them before we had the cottage at the big house, and we were there.
This is at Hyde Park.
This is at Hyde Park. And weekends, sometimes in the summer, a great deal. And then, of course, Valkill Cottage was about 3 miles from the big house. Of course, the big house is in Hyde Park.
Can you tell us about Valkill, the cottage, how it came about?
We would go up and stay with Mr. Roosevelt's mother at, we always called her home, the big house. And one day, Mr. Roosevelt was with us, and we were having a picnic. And Eleanor said, well, this is our last picnic this year. And Franklin said, why? She said, Granny's closing the big house. And he said, aren't you silly? Why don't you build a house for yourselves? He said, I will give you a life lease on any of my land that you want to mark out and build yourself a cottage. So we said, all right. It was perfectly beautiful to begin with. It was made, the greater part out of it, of fieldstone. And it came to be a center for the more relaxed life of the Roosevelt family. Eleanor used to spend quite a bit of time at the cottage, nearly always weekends and sometimes during the week. She seemed to be able to relax and be more herself there than over at the big house. There were all sorts of things that she did. One day, Nan thought it would be fun to teach her how to smoke. Eleanor was a good sport, and she tried, but she certainly did make a fizzle out of it. Franklin also enjoyed coming to the cottage. Sometimes he'd sit with his friends, doing all sorts of tricks with his hands. At the cottage, we had a large picnic area where, during the summer, many, many picnics were held. The atmosphere was very informal. The men were in their shirt sleeves, and everyone relaxed and did the thing that they most wanted to do. The president loved picnics, and he used to enjoy gathering his friends around him there. Often his mother came too. I don't know if she was quite so keen about them. Harry Hopkins was a natural clown and often enjoyed entertaining the president by his own particular antics. Winston Churchill came over to the cottage a number of times. One insufferably hot day, after a conference with the president, he went into the pool, cotton stuffed in his ears, and had a good swim. Princess Juliana of the Netherlands often visited, and so did her mother, Queen Wilhelmina.
On the gold ship, slowly pop.
Shirley Temple was also a guest one day. She enjoyed playing with many of the children in the area.
On the sunny beach of Peppermint Bay.
A memorable occasion was the visit of King George and Queen Elizabeth. Eleanor has described an incident which took place during their stay.
When the King and Queen of England came to see us at Hyde Park in 1939, we decided we would try to give them as much of an American entertainment as we could. And we had a picnic. We had a smoked turkey, which the King had never tasted. We had several kinds of ham cured in different parts of the country. And, of course, the celebrated hot dogs. The King and Queen enjoyed themselves enormously. The entertainment was given by American Indians, and they had a very good time. The only drawback was that the Queen found she could not eat a hot dog. Her mouth was too small.
Franklin loved his family and enjoyed being with them on all occasions. This happened to have been Franklin Jr.'s birthday in August. They took out the canoe and had quite a roughhouse. The father thoroughly enjoyed it. Whenever he could, he tried to enter into all of their activities. Eleanor and Franklin took great pleasure in being around the pool with their grandchildren and watching them learn to swim. One day, having left the pool, I thoughtlessly drew a blade of grass across the president's foot. It jerked. I said, "It moved," and he said, "Yes. Just because the muscles are paralyzed, it does not mean that the nerves are." This was the only time that he ever referred to his illness with me. The county fair at Rhinebeck, New York, not far from Hyde Park, was always an exciting occasion for anyone interested in sports. One year, John and Anna Roosevelt took part. They both came off with honors, which I think pleased their father even more than it did them. Eleanor Roosevelt loved riding. When she lived at the White House, it was one of her favorite pastimes. Often she would go to Rock Creek Park, and at other times follow that fascinating towpath along the Potomac. She looked very handsome in her riding clothes, but often was criticized for not wearing the proper kind of hat. A special area in the grounds of the White House was set aside for the president's grandchildren. Often, Eleanor would go out to play with them, for she enjoyed joining with them in their various games. Although the children did receive a great deal of attention, they were not spoiled. When Ellen and Franklin came to the White House, they eliminated a number of social activities, but one which they both felt was vital was the Easter egg rolling. This meant so much to the children of Washington, who came here every year with their eggs and certainly made an awful mess of the grounds. The litter did not bother Elna and Franklin because the children had had a good time. Franklin loved to go down to Warm Springs, Georgia. There he was surrounded by people who loved him. There was an informality and a spirit of helpfulness and friendliness that permeated the entire place. Here, I think, he was truly happy. He was powerful in the pool and enjoyed a rough game of water polo. If at other times you happened to be in the pool with him, look out, because you were in for a good ducking. He seemed to have his full strength when he was in the waters. Wherever the Roosevelts were, there was sure to be a picnic. Many a time he would gather some of the patients and take them into the woods for a real picnic. On other occasions, his guests would be some of the people from the neighborhood. The food was simple and easily prepared. The president was a great raconteur, and everyone enjoyed the many, many stories that he would tell. May 31st, 1934 was a memorable day. The sun was warm and the sky blue. And there were even a few whitecaps on upper New York Bay. On this day, the president reviewed the United States fleet. This display of naval strength was the greatest that had ever passed in review before any president of the United States. Aboard the USS in Indianapolis that day were many of the president's family, his cabinet members, and a number of friends. While everyone was impressed by our naval strength, no one at that time was thinking in terms of war. The president was a Navy man, and one of the principal guests aboard that day was Josephus Daniels, under whom he had served as Assistant Secretary of the Navy. The president had always loved the sea, and when he was young, he was eager to go to Annapolis, but his father had other plans for him. During the entire day, with his Navy cape around him, he sat in the bow of the ship, and because of his extensive knowledge, he was able to identify every vessel that passed in review. In the summer of 1933, the president decided that he wanted to go to Campobello. He had not been there since he was stricken in 1921 with polio. He asked Elna, Nan, and me to go ahead, open the house, and to prepare for his coming. When the president arrived, he was greeted with great enthusiasm by the people of the island. He made a short speech, and you could see in his face the pleasure that he felt at being back with them again. The next day was the picnic. Everyone was pressed into service. the newspaper men and the photographers as well. The Indianapolis was in the bay, and the officers were invited to join us at the beach. It was a very informal picnic, as Roosevelt picnics usually were. I'm afraid that some of the Navy men were a bit surprised at the lack of formality. Franklin deeply loved Campobello, and it brought Elna much pleasure as well.
I enjoyed the Campobello life. I loved the picnics. I loved sailing to different places. You would always find new places. My husband loved it. He knew the whole coast intimately from cruising over and over again. He was a wonderful sailor.
I think some of Franklin's happiest moments came when he was sailing with friends and family. He loved simple things, and at times I felt his strength came to him out of these experiences. He was a man who thought little of the past, but always took great joy in the present.
We see in these films a great deal of happiness of the Roosevelt family relaxing, and yet they were made during the 1930s, during the Great Depression. Isn't there a contradiction in this?
No, because we lived simply. It wasn't extravagant. Our picnics were very simple picnics, and each one of us was doing something in addition.
But were you aware, even during these happy picnics, of
absolutely.
the burden of the Depression, the problem?
Absolutely. We were very conscious of it. Oh, yes, it wasn't a shutting out of the world, but it was a relaxation and enjoyment of the simple things of life among friends.
When you look at these films again, what kind of a feeling do you have?
When I look at the films, I can't help but have many different reactions. Happiness in regard to a period of life that was interesting and exciting and in which very constructive things were being done. A feeling of sadness because I happen to have been younger than Mr. Roosevelt or Mrs. Roosevelt or Miss Cook, and I feel very much alone, and there comes a sense of loneliness that is almost inevitable. But I'm grateful that my life included this relationship and friendship and sharing of very definite, real efforts to do something for people, because that was something that motivated each one of us.
Franklin Roosevelt left an indelible mark on American life. Starting in the Depression with his first 100 days in office, he made government an activist government, a government to help people in need. Many of the programs he launched, such as Social Security, were very controversial at the time, but they have been maintained and even expanded by Republican administrations as well as Democratic ones. Franklin D. Roosevelt would have been 90 years old this Sunday.
He's your boy. And times like this happen only once. Are you going to risk this moment on something less than Kodak film? Look for the name Kodak. It does make a difference.
The country is just as fresh and green. Without you, the winter is just as crisp and clean. Without you, the sea is just as blue. Without you, and love is just as true without you. Surely anyone can do without you.
NBC News Chronolog continues after station identification.
John Forsythe stars in Topaz, tomorrow at 9, 8 Central Time.
First, TWA introduced its big, comfortable 747 coach lounge. When you're flying on our 747s, it's terrific. Now, TWA introduces its new, intimate 707 coach lounge. When you're flying our smaller 707s, it's terrific. TWA's ambassador service. For the coach passenger, it's the most comfortable fleet of planes in the world.
Okay, partner, let's go get him. Boy, it's a long way up there.
The paramedics answer another emergency. As one unit acts on the spot, another one has already done its work. In a nearby hospital, the doctor is taking over to try to save a life. In this case, perhaps thousands.
Respiratory arrest. And do trach tube, quick. I say we proceed on the basis of botulinus intoxication.
You could throw the whole city into panic. Look at the machinery that goes into action.
Then we'd better get them rolling. Because if I'm right, a lot of people can be saved by finding the source.
As they work, another emergency is met.
We have an 11-year-old boy trapped in a building collapse.
Life sounds evident. We're presently pumping air into him.
Sounds like he's on the far end.
This is Emergency. Emergency, Saturday at 8, 7 Central.
Tonight, on the new CBS Friday Night Movies, She Waits.